And I've actually had people comment to me about that, like, "Wow, you're fearless about hiring people that are really good." I'm like, "Of of course."
What am I here
Like,
for?
why
Yeah,
wouldn't I?
exactly.
Like, they're like, "You're not afraid that they might be better than you." I'm like, "No, I want them to be better than
Oh,
me."
let's break that down a little bit because this is a common fear with a lot of people who are not only starting businesses but are also in positions of leadership. I feel like we come from a place of insecurity by surrounding ourselves with people who are better than we are. But if you listen to the top stories of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, they're often saying the one thing I realized is I had to surround myself with people who were better than me. How did we come to that realization of why that's so important? Let's kind of hammer that home.
Oh, well, I just know that I'm good at certain things and not good at other things, and uh, my capacity for some things is not the same as what other people's capacity is, and I need to surround myself with people who can do the work that I can't do. Yeah, and it's just that simple. And I remember saying early on with somebody that I hired, one of my first hires, who's become a very good friend of mine as well. And I said to him early on, if you ever see me let my ego get in the way of this organization, you have permission to tell me. And there's only been one time that he's had to say that. This is not about me. This is about what this organization can do for the community. And I can't do everything. It would be arrogant and foolish to think that I could. So, and I want to have a team that is trusted out in the community. I can't be the only one who's the evangelist for the organization and for the work that we do. So it's one of those things, I don't quite get it because it's just common sense. But didn't Thomas Paine say common sense was not common at all?
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart Hustle podcast. Now, today is going to be an incredibly important episode because I have the CEO of the Seneca Park Zoo Society here with me today. Miss Pamela Reed is joining the show. Today, we're going to talk about the Zoo Society's approach to conservation education. We're going to talk about why this work is so important to Miss Sanchez. We're going to talk about leadership philosophy. We're going to talk about combating environmental challenges through community engagement and so much more. Pamela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Keenan, for this opportunity. This is exciting.
This is going to be an amazing conversation because I've had one other guest on the podcast before, and I believe I mentioned him in our previous conversation. His name was Jeff Vennick. He's a HR people culture leader from the Hogle Zoo in Utah. And he was so passionate about environmental conservation and why this work is so important. And I'm hoping that we can dive into some of that today in our conversation. But before we do, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Work is out of bounds. How would the person who's sitting across this digital table with me be described?
As somebody who really enjoys nature, who finds peace and centeredness in nature, who's going to be out on the water as much as possible in her kayak, uh, who mm, who really believes that our role while we're here on this planet is to leave the world a better place, and that our job too is to figure out which problem it is that we want to solve. And I'm constantly working at that.
I feel like you're doing an amazing job of that. And I know that that did not just start in your current role as the CEO of this organization, but you shared something that was really enlightening to me. You said when you were a kid, there was a sign on the light switch and it said, turn it off,
Right.
if I believe I'm correct.
That is correct.
Why was that? And how did that inspire any type of thought?
So early 70s, I was a kid. I'm aging myself, but that's okay. Early 70s, we were in the middle of an energy crisis, and my dad would put post-it notes like on the basement. We had a little little living room set up in our basement, and it was our kids' playroom basically. And he put a little post-it note on the light switch saying, "Turn it off when you leave the room." And it was a reminder to us that energy is precious, and it is in many cases, a non-renewable source. We were also at that time in the midst of the energy crisis, depending on whether you had an odd or even number to end your license plate, you could go get gas or not. You know, if you had an even number, you were Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and an odd number Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or something like that. That's my memory. And at the same time, we were watching these, terrible. We see them now and we're like, oh, that's a terrible commercial. But it was the commercial of the man crying when he saw the pollution. We were really making a mess of the world. And so policies began to change. Uh, the environmental movement really started at that time. Earth Day started when I was a kid, and I remember it vaguely. I didn't put words to it at that time, but the Environmental Protection Agency was founded, Clean Air Act, Clean Waters Act. All of those things happened when I was a kid. And I grew up thinking we had kind of solved those problems until I got a little older and really started spending more time in this uh, before we were all talking about climate change. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I was reading Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and saying we are really in a crisis, and if we can't pretend we've solved it, we all got to get involved, all hands on deck with this.
How did we come from a place where you came from a generation where you were exposed to so many of these messages? It seemed like everybody would be so informed just out of, I'll use this word like intentionally, indoctrination of the current crisis that we were in when it came to the environment, energy, clean water. Why do you think we drifted away from that? And what was the realization when you got older that said, wow, we really need to do a lot more work?
That is such a good question. I think that we as a society, and I'm talking about American culture here in general, broad general terms, I'll probably get myself into trouble, but I think that we have a tendency to think that we have done the legislation, we have set up the bureaucratic structures to make it work. We can clap our hands and move on to the next thing. And even though there are people set up who are taking care of those things, the attention has moved on to the next crisis, and we got a lot of crises in this country. So you think that, and I've worked in different nonprofits, I've worked in different cultural organizations, and we get fatigued about a certain crisis. We want to believe that there's people taking care of it so we can move on to the next thing. We have very short attention spans, and they're shorter now than they ever were. We want to know that something has been taken care of. We spent time on that. Look, it's no different than civil rights, than women's rights. We thought we took care of those things, and we didn't know that we were going to have to keep a constant watch to make sure that our rights weren't being eroded. And I believe that access to clean air and clean water are fundamental rights that we have as human beings, not just American citizens.
When you feel like you don't have rights to those things, it completely warps and shapes your worldview. In our previous conversation, you talked about some of the impacts on like my current generation, the millennials, people who are in that prime age of having children and starting to build the next generations of our company or of our country, often feel like we don't have a safe enough environment to even bring children into this world. Doesn't that alarm you?
Again, at the risk of getting myself in trouble, what alarms me most is that the people who are thinking that way are the people that we most need to have children who will be raised understanding the issues and knowing that they need to take part in solving them. I have my own niece moved to Germany during COVID with her husband because they thought that Germany would be a kinder place to raise children. And indeed it is in many ways. Who would have thought that 40, 50 years ago? But that is definitely the case. A lot of the young people that we work with at the zoo, whether it's in zoo camp or zoo teens or urban ecology program, a lot of them come from really difficult situations. We didn't talk about this last time, but we had a young man in our urban ecology program who we were his emergency contact for everything. And he had a nurse call in from the hospital bed where he was in the hospital to let us know that he wasn't going to be at work, that his job was really important to him, but he had sustained stab wounds because he stepped in front of his mother's boyfriend who was coming at her. He had sustained these. He was going to be okay, but he had saved his mother's life. But he wanted us to know he couldn't get to work, and that he wouldn't be coming back to work because they had to go find someplace safe. And that just meant so much to us to know that we mattered enough to him, that his time with us had taught him what peace in nature can feel like. And it's something that wherever that young man is right now, he knows that he can go take a walk someplace and in nature and feel safe, whether it's a city park or someplace else. He knows it's for him. A lot of the young people that we work with have not spent any time in nature. Where I live in Rochester, New York, I'm on the southern edge of Lake Ontario, right at where the Genesee River, literally the Genesee River runs through Rochester, New York. The Great Lakes are one of the best sources of fresh water on the planet. The Genesee River is a powerful, wonderful river. Kids living half an hour or half a mile from it have never been down to the sides of the Genesee River. They've never been up to the lake. They don't even know what a quick walk or bike ride could take them into where the blue herons and the deer and the fox are, right in the heart of the city. And so our job is to connect them to that, because if you don't know about it, why would you care about it? Why would you worry about throwing your garbage down a storm drain if you don't know that the storm drain connects to the Genesee River, which connects to your drinking water? Why would it be relevant to you? So our first job with anyone, is to get them to fall in love with the living world. And you have to expose them to that first. And whether that's through the animals that they see at the zoo or through one of our outreach programs, that is our job every day. First and foremost, we want people to fall in love with the living world. Because when you fall in love with something, you act differently. You behave differently. You act on its behalf. You make changes in your own behavior to benefit that thing that you love. It doesn't have to be a person. It can be nature. And so that's our job. It's a pretty great one.
I was talking to another individual on the podcast recently, and their episode's going to drop, and he said something that was really powerful. He said the biggest form of evil in today's world is ignorance. And if you think about the antithesis of ignorance, it's knowledge. If we think about all the conflicts and the things that we think about in life, right? What are you going to say?
I think the antithesis is curiosity.
I love that. I love that. The point that he was making was, anytime we feel disconnected or feel that we can do harm to a person, to another gender, to another society, or even nature in itself, is because we truly don't understand how connected and alike we really are. And if we are curious and we can understand that everything is connected, from Lake Ontario to the Genesee River to the cigarettes that we throw out the window, and how that is all connected, I feel like we would be in a much better place. But the question for you is, why is it so easy for us to feel so disconnected from this entire life experience that we're a part of right now?
Keenan, I don't know if I can answer that. And part of it is I don't know if I want to go there, because that takes me to such a sad, despondent place of how many issues that so many young people face today, so many issues that families face today. And regardless of what's happening in someone's life, they deserve joy. They deserve to feel hopeful. And if you don't know what those things feel like, that is such a sad place. My daughter is a third grade teacher, and she's in a suburb, but it's a very diverse suburb. And she sees families, these kids, these third graders already are going through so much trauma in their own lives. And when you are constantly living in trauma, the only thing that you can do is focus on getting through to the next day. Without the tools of understanding, hey, if you go out and you just put your bare feet on grass for 10 minutes, you will actually become rooted and feel better. I mean, there's scientific evidence now. 10 minutes with your feet on the ground and your heart rate will go down, and your feelings of mental and physical wellness will increase, because they are, in fact, because we are all connected. And I think one of the things that we struggle with, particularly in my culture, Caucasian culture, if you will, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a brilliant environmental scientist who's an indigenous woman, says the Caucasian culture wants to learn about science, or wants to learn about nature, Well, indigenous learns from nature. And I think that is so true that there is this um, desire to name everything. Well, I can't. I go out in nature all the time. I love looking at birds. I cannot name most of them. I don't know their calls. I have to, I look it up every time, but I just want to learn from it. And I think that's where you have to start. You have to meet people where they are, give them a moment of joy, give them a little bit something to be curious about, and let them begin the dream themselves. I go back to Maslow's hierarchy of need, and deep back in my history, I love leadership theory and motivation theory, and so I loved your recommendation, by the way. Right, book is right here.
Oh, you've got it.
Oh
nice.
yeah, absolutely. But
Okay.
so if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know this, where it's like you need to have shelter, safety, physical food, and then you get to what he called the top level was self-actualization, right? Where you understand who you are as a person and you become comfortable with what you are. Well, what he didn't say, and he was a German scientist, is that he took that theory from the indigenous of Northwest Pacific and Canada. And that was not the top of the pyramid. The next level of it was community. And what the indigenous believe, and it makes so much sense, is that once you are comfortable with who you are and have your own needs met, then the most important thing becomes focusing on community. And the Maasai, when they greet each other in Tanzania, they say, "How are the children?" instead of "How are you?" How are the children? Because it's about, if the children are okay, then we're okay. This need to take care of other people that can get lost in the dominant culture in this country. I took that way off course, but
No, that was perfect. This is great. This is going to be an amazing conversation. I'm super excited. So, part of what you were talking about there, and I mentioned this in our previous conversation, was the Surgeon General came on to a national broadcast in 2022 and said the biggest threat to our society is not another viral pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Now, to touch on that area that we didn't really want to go to, I have a theory, but that's very interesting. And this kind of hits home for the individual who named you guys as his emergency contact. We find ourselves in a place right now where life has never been better, but at the same time, we've never been more disconnected from that highest level of community. With all the distraction that comes from these little devices, I've got my phone in my hand for everybody who's listening today, we are constantly being bombarded by images that have been optimized to keep us in a place of fear, a place of reactiveness, because that's what gets engagement. And that's how these algorithms have recognized to be able to tune into our little human brains, our lizard brains, if you will, to show us things that keep us in that traumatic loop of, I have to focus on the right now, so I can't even think larger than myself. And that in itself is a tragedy. So my biggest theory that I want to kind of expand on a little bit with you is I feel like we are so neglected in our personal lives to have that sense of connection that great organizations and leaders like the person who's sitting across from me right now have the ability to inspire people and fill those gaps of connection, validation, and being seen by the work that we do. And that's why I believe so much in the mission and the objectives that you're taking on by just being able to show people that there's something bigger than the little world that we often live in, which is represented by an iPhone or an Android screen, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. We are an incredibly mission-focused organization, and our mission is to inspire our community, connect with, care for, and conserve wildlife and wild spaces. That's our entire mission statement. And we review it constantly. It's in, different rooms, different offices, and we hire for mission-aligned people. And that has changed over the course of the time that I've been there. I've been there 10 years now, and we have really made a name for ourselves as a conservation organization, as an organization that's making a difference in our community and internationally. The number of incredibly qualified applicants that we get for any open position is extraordinary. Even for our part-time positions, people are lining up to work for us. each summer recruit about 120 zoo teen volunteers who are all there. They have to apply, go through an interview process. They're there because they want to talk about conservation. Yes, they like animals, but they're there because they feel passionate about helping save these animals by telling all of our guests about them and getting them to care. And it really becomes the focus of everything that we do. All of our programs, how does it serve the mission? And our mission is very carefully created to say it's about our community. It's not about the people who come through our gates. It's not about our members. It's not about our donors. It's about the entire community that we serve, which is a 9-county region in upstate New York. We have an obligation to get everybody to connect with nature and care about it to the point where they want to act on its behalf. And so if you start every meeting, every staff meeting as we do, with a revisit of what our mission is by saying, hey, tell me, we call them not so cool moments, where people can share a mission moment, and we can just remind ourselves constantly of what is good that we are doing and the impact that we're having. And their stories, maybe an accounting manager will talk about seeing a guest on site and hearing them talk about the sturgeon or whatever it might be. You never know where their stories are come from, but everybody has a story. And that's really important, that everybody, no matter what your role is at the organization, understands how they connect to the mission, how their job helps drive getting the objectives met for the organization. You see one of my Bibles back here, John Doerr's Measuring What Matters. We have 4 company-wide objectives that everybody understands their role in. We have to maximize revenue. We have to deepen and broaden engagement. We have to be seen as a conservation organization, and we have to be seen as a welcoming place for all. And so whether you are a volunteer manager or a finance director or an educator, or you run the membership program, everything you do relates to all 4 of those objectives. And when everybody is tied to mission fulfillment, then everybody shows up every day wanting to work together to figure out how we jointly meet that mission. And it sounds all Pollyanna, but it works. We do surveys of the staff and discover, what they love best, going back to those connection moments. They love our staff meetings. Who loves meetings? Our staff wants meetings. They want to sit in a room together. A lot of their work is varied and they don't get to work together, but when they're in a meeting together, they feel connected to each other and to the mission, and they understand what their role is in it, and they get excited about what other people are doing.
Through sharing those simple, not so cool moments, right? What we're doing is we're sharing impact, which gives us insights to the bigger mission that we're a part of, which boosts conviction. It's much easier to stand behind something that you are selling and experience a connection with nature when you have conviction to the impact that you're making. And I feel like that in itself is such a beautiful small element, because yes, you're right. Who does love staff meetings? But when you understand why you're coming together to be able to be a part of something larger than yourself, this goes right back to the element I was just talking about, that earning, that deep yearning for that sense of connection to something larger. And I feel like it's amazing organizations like you and yours and leaders like yourself that have the ability to inspire people to be a part of something larger than themselves, which is so beautiful. Now, one of the things that I recognize is we often discount the experiences that we've been through in life that bring us to this exact moment. In our previous conversation, you had mentioned something like our careers are something like a spiral, right? They lead us to different places. All of the moments are a culmination, if you will, to these opportunities. Let's kind of talk about your culmination of experiences that have brought you to this moment.
Yeah, I had a circuitous route to where I am. And I was telling you in our last conversation that a speaker at my college commencement talked about how the career ladder wasn't a straight up and down ladder, but a spiral staircase. And so sometimes you make these lateral moves but you're constantly moving forward. And what I have discovered along the way is now I'm in a position where everything makes sense, where all of the things that I have done along the way, I started thinking I wanted to be a hospital administrator, and then I did an internship in London in a hospital for a month and went, no. Went on to do doctoral work at Syracuse University, studying nonprofit management, organization theory, and then got sidetracked into environmental policy and energy policy, which was what a lot of my work went in. I moved to Arizona to be an assistant professor at Arizona State University, teaching intro to public administration, organization theory, organization change, managing diversity, environmental and energy policy, and did not feel that I was really moving the needle. I was teaching people who were maybe using what I was teaching, but I wasn't making an impact myself. The research that I was doing, the publications that I was, that were out there were only being accessed by people who needed to read them and quote them for their own research, and it just didn't feel meaningful. So I went into nonprofit management, I would always been interested in what calls somebody to nonprofit management versus public sector or private sector. And there are definitely differences in why somebody works for a nonprofit. We tend not to get rich in the nonprofit world, and our rewards are different than monetary. So I worked in social services for a few years. I worked with high-risk youth for the first 3 years, and then I worked actually with even higher risk youth at a special needs adoption agency. And I learned a lot about the social issues facing families and facing kids. And then I had an opportunity to go to work for an arts organization in a development role, which is fundraising basically. And I thought, oh, how nice it's going to be to not have to tell sad stories to get people to open up their wallets. And it was true. And the people that support cultural organizations, we talked at the beginning about you get tired, you're involved in this crisis for a little bit and then you move to the next. It's the same thing with social services. People, they're involved with the Cancer Society for a while, and then their need to do that sort of shifts to a different cause. The arts and cultural world doesn't work like that. If you love art, you love art, and you're not going to stop loving art. The same is true of the environmental world. But I worked for a number of cultural organizations, then had an opportunity to move back to my hometown to take on a role as Director of Strategic Planning and Resource Development for an International Museum of Photography and Film. You're like, what do these things have to do with each other? But it's all about relationship building, right? And it's all about learning and figuring out what it all means together. And the year that I turned 50, 10 years ago, ouch, I got a call from a headhunter, and they said, we've got a job I think you might be interested in looking at. And it was this role of leading the Zoo Society at really a critical juncture in the zoo's history. And I thought, what a way to go back to my environmental roots, to be a leader of an organization that is doing really meaningful work, but maybe not telling its story as well. At the time that I took the job, their catchphrase, their tagline was "the natural place for families," and the logo had a sun in it with primary colors. And the reputation in town was it's a great place to go if it's a sunny day and you've got small children, because that's what they were putting out there. And nobody really understood that we were really involved in conservation, not to the extent that we are now. We do so much more with communities right now. We raise a lot more and send out a lot more grant money now than we did. But really, it was an organization at the precipice of needing to be more in the community, needing to have a bigger presence. And I thought, this is amazing. And there's never been a day, there have been hard days, but there has never been a day that I have not gotten out of bed and said, yes, I can't wait to get to work. Because, and I think I told you this last time, I know every day what I'm doing is making a difference, and that we're reaching people, and all of that collective action that we're inspiring can actually make a difference, whether it's for the Amur tigers or the African lions or the North American river otters, like that, or just us, our ability to have clean air and clean water, just by small actions, inspiring people to say, I get it now, and I'm going to turn down my thermostat, or I get it now, and I'm going to stop putting the lawn clippings down the storm drain. Or, oh, all right, I'll make sure I know where my fish is from when I buy it. Or I will stop using products that have palm oil that's not sustainably sourced. I will use reusable bags. There's so many small actions that we can all take that can collectively make a difference, but it's got to be all of us. It can't just be a subset of people. For way too long, conservation has belonged to a subset of people, and they have been wealthy white people. And the planet is not sustainable that way. So whether it's a business decision, a nature decision, or simply the right thing to do, we've got to spread out conservation to absolutely everybody.
I want to point out something to everybody who's watching and listening today. The best leaders who are the most passionate about their cause, who have come on this show, often have a similarity with exactly what you just identified very succinctly. You said, when I got an opportunity to work with this organization, we are at a precipice, a crossroads on how we could be doing more. Great leaders often do not shy away from opportunities to have a greater impact, but rather they lean into those moments to fill the gap. That's something that I recognize about you. Have you always been that type of leader who's willing to lean into the challenging situations to make a bigger impact than I guess you could even understand?
I don't know the answer to that question. I'd like to say yes. I've always wanted to do more. I've always been very vocal about what I see as injustices, what I see as things that could be done differently. I'm not sure it's always been as welcome as when you're the CEO. There's a lot more leeway in what I can do. But gathering the people around me who are on board with it. And it's not always easy. You come in as a new CEO and there's changes that have to be made, and there's that mission alignment around what we do that didn't necessarily exist when I got there. There were people who were there just doing a job, and I'm not really interested in having people work for me who are just doing a job. I want people, first of all, who are better at their role than I could ever be. I couldn't do the role of anybody that works for me. They are amazing. They are passionate. They are knowledgeable. They are skilled. I rely on them. That's what you do. You hire people who are better than you are. Otherwise, what are you doing? And I've always done that. And I've actually had people comment to me about that, like, "Wow, you're fearless about hiring people that are really good." I'm like, "Of course."
What am I here for?
Why
Yeah,
wouldn't
exactly.
I? Like, they're like, "You're not afraid that they might be better than you." I'm like, "No, I want them to be better than
Oh,
me."
let's break that down a little bit, because this is a common fear with a lot of people who are not only starting businesses but are also in positions of leadership. I feel like we come from a place of insecurity by surrounding ourselves with people who are better than we are. But if you listen to the top stories of successful entrepreneurs, CEOs, founders, they're often saying the one thing I realized is I had to surround myself with people who were better than me.
Yeah.
How did we come to that realization of why that's so important? Let's kind of hammer that home.
Oh, well, I just know that I'm good at certain things and not good at other things, and uh, my capacity for some things is not the same as what other people's capacity is, and I need to surround myself with people who can do the work that I can't do. Yeah, and it's just that simple. And I remember saying early on with somebody that I hired, one of my first hires, who's become a very good friend of mine as well. And I said to him early on, if you ever see me let my ego get in the way of this organization, you have permission to tell me. And there's only been one time that he's had to say that. This is not about me. This is about what this organization can do for the community. And I can't do everything. It would be arrogant and foolish to think that I could. So, and I want to have a team that is trusted out in the community. I can't be the only one who's the evangelist for the organization and for the work that we do. So it's one of those things, I don't quite get it because it's just common sense. But didn't Thomas Paine say common sense was not common at all?
That's exactly right. And this is why a huge percentage of businesses fail long term, in my personal opinion. There's an element of ego that's involved in being the leader where we feel like we are the brain trust, right? I've been a big believer in my professional and my personal maturation process of masterminds, being able to get in the room so I can learn from other people's experiences. And very transparently, this is one of the ways in which I personally benefit from this podcast is I have the ability to share in the same space as a great leader like you who's been through experiences that I might not have context of today. But in the future, I'll have that subconscious memory of my conversation with Pamela and the reaffirmation and I would say the reinforcement of an idea that you have to surround yourself with good people.
Yeah.
So I benefit from this, but I often feel like so many people are scared to take that leap because how is that going to make me look compared to everybody else if everybody's better than me? Am I a great leader?
Yes. Yes. I think the other thing that I see with a lot of leaders, whether it's small business or nonprofits, is founder syndrome, where they're just so invested in their own vision, their own dream, that the thought of somebody else who might have a vision or dream that could take it to the next level is very threatening to them. And I'm not that. I am not a visionary leader. I have some good visions, but I'm a strategist. And I believe there's three types of people, and I hire for each of them. There's visionaries, there's strategists, and there's tacticians. I am not a tactician. I'm a good strategist. I hire people who are visionaries as well. They feed me with ideas, and I can pick out the ones that I know make sense for the organization, and I can get from A to G to M to V, and then I need the tacticians that get us from A, B, C, D. And that's, to me, that is so basic to management, is you have to have those people who love the details, who thrive in the details. I'm not one of them. I like big picture. So
there's an amazing opportunity for us to point to the book that's directly behind you. In the first couple pages, Gary Vaynerchuk talks about the 12 and a half ingredients that make a great leader great. And one of those is self-awareness, which I feel like you just hit on incredibly succinctly. Why do you feel like self-awareness is a skill set that is prominent in great leaders today by the definition of Gary V in 12 and a half?
if you're not self-aware, then you don't understand, or it is harder to understand how to communicate with other people and what your own biases and fallbacks are when you're communicating. Knowing your weaknesses helps you build on them and improve on them. I love when he talks about the 12, the half one, the kind candor, and that it's an opportunity to keep building it, because I think that is so true. We can only work on ourselves when we know what our weaknesses are. It's not enough to know our strengths. We have to be thinking, as I said, I'm not a detail person. So after every meeting I have to say, okay, who needs to know all of these things that I just learned? And I have to constantly work at that. If I weren't self-aware about that, there would be things falling through every single day. And I probably wouldn't be as aware. Like I'm not great with the attagirls and attaboys. I definitely give people props when they've gone above and beyond, but because I'm not a person who needs a lot of pat on the backs, my intrinsic motivation is different than that. It comes from inside me. I have to remind myself that other people really do need those. They need that on a regular basis to be reminded how much they are appreciated. And so to me, self-awareness is just absolutely critical. But it's hard to look in the mirror. It's really hard to look in the mirror.
And that's one of the things I found about entrepreneurship is this entire experience is really standing in front of a mirror and having to look yourself in the face and be self-aware to recognize some of the areas that I can improve. I was talking to another CEO from a nonprofit in Connecticut the other day, a guy named Gino. So Gino, huge shout out to you. He talked about, I have to recognize the days when I have to shapeshift or show up as a different person based on the context of the person who I'm talking to. And I thought that was really enlightening to recognize that your job as a leader is not always to be the same person, but it's to shapeshift and meet people where they are in the moments where they truly need that version of you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I call it being a chameleon. Nature girl. But I think it's so funny when you said meet people where they are, because that to me is the key to everything that we do, is meeting people where they are. And going back to assuming people have no knowledge and no context and have never seen these animals before, whether it's a hellbender, which you probably don't know what that is, or a giant millipede or a African elephant. Like, to start where people are, meet people where they are. They may have great fear about some of the things that they see at the zoo or that they experience. They may have fear of walking down a trail in a park because it is so unfamiliar, or they've been told not to. They may have fear of getting in the water because culturally water is something that they are not used to and they've been told stay away from it. So meeting people where they are is key to everything. And so I don't treat my urban ecologist workforce development kids, employees, the same way that I treat my board of trustees. I don't treat the, it's, I don't know that it's code shifting, but it's definitely being able to recognize what people need, and never making assumptions. And yeah, I love that, meeting people where they are.
I was interviewing a surgeon and a PhD in neuroscience, and we were having a conversation about the most important skill set of successful people and leaders today. And he said, emotional regulation. With all the challenges that you face when it comes to combating narratives that we see in the media, people not believing in the vision for what you guys are doing and the bigger opportunity to conserve everything that is in front of us in the form of nature and wildlife, how do you kind of think about your ability to regulate your emotions as a leader?
There isn't a choice. And I think it's really important to have, it's very hard to have work-life balance when you are a CEO of a nonprofit, or any CEO. Lots of us have trouble with work-life balance. But you have to make time to get away and have downtime. And I'm an introvert, so it's really important that I have super quiet downtime on a regular basis. I have learned over the years, maybe through failing at times, that keeping a straight countenance and never elevating is really important to being a leader. And some of the most powerful people I know and have worked with never raise their voice above this level, because they know how to use their words in ways that are incredibly powerful. And when I have to have very difficult conversations with people, I never raise my voice above this level. And it doesn't matter what they say back to me or whether they elevate. If they elevate, I will say, it's time to close this conversation and return to it when we can both behave as adults. Because not regulating it makes things far worse. And I've definitely learned that. And I go back to that kind candor that Vandertuck talks about, and how difficult that is. And we all have conversations that we avoid. He talks a lot in other places about avoiding conflict, and how he's a master at it. I think it was Vandertuck that talked about that years ago. And the more you can desensitize yourself to avoiding conflict by having the difficult conversations, the more you realize this isn't really that hard. And this is an important part of business. To me, it's business. And it's not, you have to take the emotions out, but then you have to go and get them out elsewhere.
I agree. As you were talking there, I read a book by a guy named Ray Dalio called Principles. I'm not sure if you've read it. Mm-mm. So Ray Dalio is a big financial guy, and he talks about the concept of healthy conflict in his organization. He said, healthy conflict represents being willing to have that tough conversation, being willing to have the ideas butt up against one another, because when we have that one-time tough conversation, it only lasts for a minute. But if we let it go and we avoid that conflict, it builds upon itself and impacts everything else that we do as a team. And I really love that. It's just so powerful to kind of think about. The highest form of compassion that we can really have for others is that definition of almost true love. If your son or daughter or anybody else who has a relationship, who's listening and watching to this podcast, if you knew that they were doing wrong by themselves, do you truly love them if you were not willing to have that tough conversation with them? That tough conversation is the highest form of compassion that you can have for another person, because you're not coming from a place of malice. You're not coming from a place of trying to hurt somebody. You want to help. And that's what love and compassion truly is in my definition.
No, I think that's exactly right. And when we have performance issues, we have a lot of places use these performance improvement plans. And it's a scary thing for people. And what I always say is, look, I have used these to manage people to success. And I have used these to have people understand this is not the right role for them. But the most important thing is for you to know this is what we expect from you. This is what we need from you. And we're going to give you a structure to make that happen and figure out how to have you succeed. I want everyone to succeed. Not everybody does, but we have to give them the resources and the structure to succeed. We hired them for a reason. And it's, yeah, so I am unafraid of those conversations. And my team, once they've been through a couple of them, they become unafraid of it. I also, I love the conversations with new employees who come to me with, what would you think about, they think they're touching some sacred cow that I have with an event or something like that. What would you think? I'm like, if you think that's what we should do, go for it. They're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, one of our workplace values is willingness to change. And I always say, if we can do it a better way, let's try it. If it doesn't work, what have we lost? Like, we gotta always be looking at how we can do things better than we are.
A healthy relationship with experimentation is so important. I think I heard Jeff Bezos at one point in time talked about how many experiments they've run as Amazon. He's like, we've run so many experiments and they have crashed and burned, but the ones that have worked out have turned into things like AWS services, which is a huge part of our revenue now, which is Amazon Prime. Those are all experiments that we've built into the culture here. Now, there's some other elements of the Amazon culture that we won't talk about, but I do love those elements, which I think is really important. Now, there's something that is on the front of my mind, and I want to use this as a transition. The human mind is very bad at recognizing how small events today impact a bigger picture in the future. An example, if you eat a bag of chips every single night, it doesn't seem like a big deal today, but a year from now, you're going to end up gaining like 40 pounds. When it comes to the small moments of encouragement, motivation, giving people good access to information about conservation, how are you thinking about the small actions today in the micro impacting the bigger picture of the macro of the mission that you guys are on?
Yeah, so it's about hope, right? And you and I talked about this a little bit. Hope is one of our values, but it's also when you're asking people to make a change in their behavior. We'll go back to the diet thing. If you feel ashamed that you have gained weight and that you are not as fit as you used to be, and it feels hopeless, you might, for a few days, be good about your diet and get back to your 10,000 steps walking, but then something happens and you have a chocolate bar and you feel bad about yourself, and then you don't keep going because you just feel bad about yourself. But if you have hope that over time your actions will lead to you feeling better, if you see progress, you feel even more hopeful. We know conservation psychology tells us that the key to having people make lasting change is for them to believe in hope, that there is hope. And so you come to the zoo and you fall in love with a snow leopard, because they're hard not to fall in love with. I mean, they're absolutely majestic creatures. They're beautiful. And then you learn that there's only about 3,500 of them left in nature. 3,500. That is not a big number. And that's a little scary. That is, if you think about like the size of some towns, you think about the number of people on a cruise ship. There's more people on a big cruise ship than there are snow leopards left in nature. That is stunning. And that's one of those aha moments. I'm totally a believer in transformational moments. Like, you can't see the world the same after you have one of those aha moments. So you have this aha moment and you think, well, that's devastating, and what's causing this? Climate change and habitat degradation. And it feels a little hopeless. But we have signs that say, but there is hope. And we talk about how human action may have caused these things, but human action can also make a difference. And we talk about the different things that are happening either with our conservation partners like the Snow Leopard Trust that are working to make a difference. We personally sponsor a beekeeper program to give people economic development opportunities in Nepal and Tibet that keep them from, it's an alternative funding source for them as opposed to livestock, which is threatened by the snow leopards. We teach them that there are all these efforts that are happening and that it's working, that we're seeing a difference. We're seeing most snow leopards. We're learning more about them. So we're beginning to bring it back from the edge. And we can talk about that with a lot of different species. And if you go, oh, there is hope, there's things like southern white rhino, I think that's the right one. Northern white, I think, is almost completely gone. Southern white rhino at the end of the century before, 1900-ish, we were down to a frighteningly low number of white rhinos. There's now, 100,000 of them because human action. American eagles, that's the greatest story. When I was a kid, they were almost gone. DDT was impacting the thickness of the eggs of the eagles, so they couldn't hatch correctly, and the eggs weren't strong enough, and so we were at risk of losing eagles. And human action, in the form of legislation, but also in the form of educating people, made a difference. And now I see eagles flying overhead on a regular basis here. So giving people hope is a whole lot better than making them feel badly about their own actions. And I told you the story of a friend who took a daughter to another zoo. That's a very good zoo, but the language is a little heavy-handed on some of the signage. And about 2 hours in, after reading all the signage, a good portion of the signage, you're like, oh, humans are terrible. And we are. And my friend's daughter, as they left, said, I'm rethinking having children. And that is not what we want people to feel. We don't want people to feel despondent. We don't want people to feel angry at what we have done to this world. There's a place for those feelings. But those aren't what are going to lead to somebody saying, you know what? I think I'm going to start composting, because that seems like it's something that's manageable for me to do that can make a difference and make me feel like I'm doing my part. So our research shows us that more than 80% of the people that come to the zoo have learned something that day that they can use to live more sustainably, and more than 80% have learned something that they can do to save animals from extinction. And that's part of what gives us hope to continue doing what we're doing, because that is the part of our mission that matters most. Our mission is about people and people's change. It's not about animals. The end result is it's saving animals from extinction, but our mission is about changing human behavior so that we all can enjoy these species and our own health for generations to come.
What we're talking about is the concept of lagging indicators here. Just like when you change habits or you change behavior in the micro, a lagging indicator is the result that comes later. So we can't often save all of these animals today, but if we change our human behavior, the result down the stream is that lagging indicator of a more harmonious ecological environment, which is just amazing to kind of think about. I want to give you an opportunity, because one of the things I always talk about when it comes to great leaders like yourself is one of your biggest opportunities to fulfill on your mission is to cast a vision so big that highly talented people, like you said, are literally banging down the doors to work at your organization, can find themselves in your vision. Let's paint a vision for the Zoo Society over the next, let's say, 2 years. So it's kind of in the micro. What are we trying to accomplish? What opportunities are in front of us? What are you excited about?
I'm really excited about all of our efforts to be more inclusive in what we do. And I think that message is really starting to resonate. And when I talk about that, our audience reflects our community pretty well in terms of demographics, and you look at any socioeconomic indicator, any ethnicity. But we have a particular charge in our region to do a better job serving the deaf and hard of hearing community, because we have the third largest per capita community of deaf and hard of hearing in the country. We have a very large number of native Spanish speakers that we are not doing a great job of reaching and speaking with. We have I think the second largest outside of New York City population of Puerto Rican. We have a huge refugee community here. We have statistics are showing that 1 in about 12 people are on the autism spectrum, and we have relationships with Autism Up here and a number of organizations serving that community. And we're doing really incredible things to ensure a welcoming experience. But as we begin to plan a new Tropic Center and new Welcome Center, we are doing them with universal design in mind and making sure that they will really feel that the place was built for them. Right now we have ASL signs, animal ID signs around that are really wonderful, done by the kids that go to school at Rochester School for the Deaf. And we're proud of that, but we know that there is so much more that we can do, because it is so important to level the playing field for who nature belongs to. We are part of the Museums for All program, which is a program coordinated by the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Association of Children's Museums. And it essentially says, if you're part of Museums for All, that if you receive SNAP card benefits, that you, for us, and for the case of the zoo, you're admitted for $1 for up to 4 people in your family. And we know how many more people are using us than used to use us. We've been on the program for 2 years. I'm on the National Advisory Committee for Museums for All, and I'm very proud to be, because we're really changing the discussion about who museums belong to. Who are they for? And in our case, it's nature for all. If you're a science museum, some people say science for all. But the idea that we are creating opportunities for a family without means to have the same family memories at the zoo that a family of means has is incredible. That they know it's a safe place, that they feel welcome, that they have joy, that they come together as a family, just like my family did when I was a kid. That's powerful to me. And I don't know if that really answers your question, but I know when I talk about this kind of thing, it's people like, yeah, I want to be part of that. I want to be a part of doing that for this community.
I think about this as culture for all, right?
Yes,
it's not science,
absolutely.
It's not museums, it's not zoos. This is culture of our planet that unifies us to be one and to be all. And I feel like that is a beautiful opportunity. There is one question that I have for you as we kind of land the plane here. So this has been, first of all, an amazing conversation. We've learned so much about your passion, environmental conservation, the challenges that we face, the opportunities, more importantly, that are in front of us. One of the things we do here on the podcast is we have our previous guest ask you a question. Now, this is an interesting one, and I need to put a little context around this. Nonprofit CEO burnout is a real challenge. Now, you had mentioned that often you are kind of, introverted and introspective, so you don't need a lot of kudos and validation from others. But when it comes to encouragement and support and reinforcement to the work that you do, instead of giving it to other people all day, how do you get support for your role as the leader of your organization? Who do you lean on?
I have a remarkable network of people that have nothing to do with work. I have a writing circle. I write poetry and memoir stuff. I have a writing circle that we get together every month. One of my dearest friends lives in Connecticut and was a former editor-in-chief of Women's Day magazine. And how Jane and I found each other is a long story, but we get together every month through Zoom. It's a network of people that don't ask me about work and know that if I have a problem at work, they're there to sound it out, but they really allow me escape. That is my answer to that question.
I love that, because it's really important. I mean, like the role of being a CEO is all consuming, right? It's not exactly easy to turn it off, because I'm sure you, like myself, we spend so much time thinking about what we're trying to do, the mission we're trying to fulfill on, how can we encourage our teammates, how can we kind of get talent into the organization who's better than us to be able to help us fulfill
Right.
on this mission. And being able to disconnect is something that I'm truly working on. Those boundaries are incredibly important. It's something I'm still trying to figure out. But when I hear the important perspective of leaders like yourself, it makes everything a lot easier to understand the importance of. And I just want to say, Pamela, thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Like, this has been an amazing conversation.
It's been
Just being able to
fun.
sit
Thank you
across this
so
table
much.
from
I
you.
could talk nonprofit leadership for a very long time, so an hour
Well, guys,
wasn't
maybe,
enough, Keenan.
yeah, maybe we should have you come back for a round two then. I think that's what the people are going to ask for. So, I just want to say, for everybody who's tuning in and watching, let's give, Pamela Reed Sanchez a big round of applause, because you are the definition of heart and hustle, hands down. So
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Keenan.